So, welcome to Midweek Experiments in Faithfulness. This is a weekly facilitated spiritual practice with a Quaker flavor and an experimental ethos. So, my name is Jen Higgins Newman, and I am the program manager here at Beacon Hill Friends House, where I live and work. The Friends House is a Quaker center for learning and action, as well as a residential community of about 20 people who live according to Quaker values. And tonight, our program will look a little bit different than usual if you've been to one of these before. So tonight here we have my friend David Coletta, and together tonight we'll be bringing the practice Deepening Your Experience of Worship Online. So last year, worship and other experiences of community and connection went online. We are here now. For some, online connection and spirituality has been difficult, feeling distanced or distracted. The good news is that there are ways that you can use this technology differently to help deepen your experience. So for this session of Midweek tonight, we bring to you an experiment in trying different practices that might change the way you feel interacting with others online. So now I'm excited to introduce you to David. David is a dad, a retired software engineer, a singer, a runner, a sexuality educator in training, a member of a Quaker-inspired cooperative household in Arlington, Massachusetts, an amateur cheesemaker, and the CTO of a cannabis startup, among other things. David is experimenting with tech ministry as a way to learn compassion and empathy in a context that is especially vital in this particular moment. So you can learn more about David's ministry at techministry.info. And again, welcome. We're happy to have you along for this journey with us this evening, and I'm going to pass things over to David.
Thanks, Jen. That's a great introduction. So now what do I say? How about the slides? Thank you. So I feel like it was a huge leg up to work with Jen on this together, and we turned out to be really good collaborators. So this is a joint effort. Okay, great. So I want to talk about care of worship to start out. Friends use the term care of worship to describe a thing that happens and also kind of like a role that a person plays, which is the person who sits in the Quaker meeting room and maybe starts holding the worship even before the appointed time and is praying for the worship during the hour, and then afterwards has some responsibilities. They may also do things like put out chairs, and they might have a microphone that they hand around to other people. So in general, what they're doing is they're hosting. They're taking care of the space and also the spiritual practice. So in the before times, it was one person in one space. In the pandemic, this big shift that has occurred, maybe without us even really commemorating it, is that we each accepted care of our own worship. So I'll say that again. We accepted care of our own worship. And what I mean by that is that when we're worshiping in a whole bunch of different segregated spaces, each of us has to do things for ourselves that previously were being done for us. Now, we don't have total care of our own worship, even at our own desk, because there's still on Zoom a person who has the spiritual role, but now we have the physical role. Of course, we had some of the physical role before too, right? Like you have care of your own body and your needs. But as we open up again, how much of that do we really want to put back the way it was, and how much do we want to keep? And that's kind of an ongoing question. So this is you, right, Jen? Okay.
Yes. So tonight's sort of different skills, or the parts that we're looking at in our presentation tonight are three. So getting to meeting for worship. In the digital world, this is addressing technical difficulties or making it possible to get on to worship. The second is setting your digital space. That's the space that we're in now on Zoom or in another online conferencing platform. And the third is setting your physical space. That's the room physically that you are in now. And the ways that all three of those play into how to arrive and then deepen our practice in meeting for worship. And although I have these in a very nice linear arrow looking diagram, in real life, it's not that simple. It might look more like this with some other little bubbles around it that are other things we won't have time to get into tonight. They might be like, have you had coffee? Or has your baby had enough sleep? Or whether you've had enough sleep? Or are there other things going on in your life? Or Zoom fatigue. This is your 15th Zoom meeting this week. And those are other factors that play into the ways that then we arrive at our meetings for worship. So on to part one, and we'll turn it back to David. Part one is getting to meeting for worship. So we're talking about addressing technical difficulties. David?
So the first part, calling getting to meeting. And one of the things that stumps people so often is, how do you find the link to meeting? Whether you can find the link or not, at the moment that meeting is started can make a big difference in how you arrive. So it's important to come up with a system that works for you and to follow it. My personal system is whenever I get a link to a meeting, I always copy and paste it into my calendar. And then it's always there at the time I want it when I look in the calendar. I've done surveys to find out how people do this. And that's one of the big ways. Some people make bookmarks, other people copy and paste it into a note file. It doesn't really matter how you do it as long as you have a consistent system. But it can be a real stressor to be, to watch the time passing while you're looking for the link. What kind of interruptions do you experience? So like, do you get texts or phone calls during worship? Do you want to respond to those texts? What if those texts are from your 17-year-old daughter? Which happens to me quite a lot. So sometimes I use Do Not Disturb if I can remember to do it. And sometimes like I got a text from her about 5 minutes into our program, and that was my reminder to turn on Do Not Disturb for just the next hour. Find a low traffic space in your home if that's possible. And I realize that a lot of these kinds of things you can do for your care of your own worship are dependent on your physical setting. Maybe there isn't a low traffic space in your home. Maybe people walking around behind you in worship is just part of the deal. But at least make conscious decisions about texting during meeting. And when I say meeting, I'm not only referring to meeting for worship, but also meeting for business or committee meetings. I'm not saying never text, especially like maybe using the in-meeting chat to talk to other people during business or maybe during a committee meeting. But think about how much you're taking yourself out of the space when you do that. Just think about that. So I also want to talk about care of your feelings as you come into worship. What are the feelings that you want to have as you settle into worship? And this is a moment where I'd just like to invite everyone to put a few feeling words in the chat. Think about the feelings that you want to have and go ahead and type those into the chat now. And I'll read them as they come through. Calm. Being prepared, coming with intentionality, being centered, settled, ready, peace. Yeah. And then what are some of the feelings that get in the way of worship for you? Go ahead, type those into the chat and I'll read them aloud again. Distracted, stress, annoyance, frustration. Rushed, Zoom fatigue, disconnection. And now here's a question to ask yourself, and this is more of a personal reflection, but for you, knowing yourself, knowing what sets the table for either the feelings you do want to have or the feelings you don't want to have can be helpful. Like comfort or discomfort in your body, taking time to prepare versus rushing to get there. And what works for you when you want to feel more or less of these feelings? This is different for everybody. It's a personal reflection to make. One piece of this is that this discernment about how to take care of the space as people are arriving is the work of ministry and council. So that's absolutely right. It's up to ministry and council to look at the meeting, figure out what is needed by the meeting, and try to facilitate that. And then the next piece of it is like, what is the thing that people are needing that's making that conversation occur? And like you said, it's that desire for the serendipitous, unplanned connection. And that's really important. And if you don't create space for it deliberately, people will just take space for it. Like, because people need it, it's a human need. And so then the question is, how do you meet that need without getting into the business of controlling people? Because an obvious next step is, well, clearly what we should do is use the feature in Zoom where people can't unmute themselves until, 10 minutes into the meeting for worship or something. And that's what they do at the Pendle Hill morning worship in the barn on Zoom. And then you just have to think about what you've done is you've replaced a custom that people have of walking silently into the meeting room with a person controlling everyone. And is that consistent with your values?
Part two, we've talked about the technical aspects of how we want to arrive to the meeting. Now we're going to talk about setting your digital space. And in this space, we'll talk more specifically about Zoom, because that's the conferencing system that most Quaker meetings are using. But some of this will apply to other systems as well.
Actually, I'm going to skip this make eye contact thing and come back to it in a second.
Great.
So everybody probably knows about switching views, but I also want to mention that in addition to the standard view or the gallery view or the speaker view, there's also this side-by-side view, which you may want to play with right now while we're looking at a slide. If you click on View Options, there's a side-by-side mode that you can pick. And when you pick side-by-side mode, and then you switch to gallery view, what you get is the best of both worlds. So on the left, you get the slides you're looking at, but on the right, you see everybody instead of just the speaker. And often we say, well, we don't want to use slides because then you can't see people. So this applies probably more to meeting for business than meeting for worship. You can do things to improve the audio that you're hearing, and one of the best ways to do that is to consider using a headset. You give up a certain amount of. It's kind of weird to be using a headset because headset kind of creates a physical barrier between your body and the people seeing you, and so and it's a signifier out in the world that people don't want to be disturbed, right? They walk around with headphones. So the visual is a little bit off, but the improvement in the audio for you might be really significant, especially if there are other people around and you are otherwise not comfortable turning up the speakers. You can also make an investment in nicer speakers. When you have speakers that reproduce the kind of full range of sound, it starts to feel less like somebody on the telephone and more like somebody in the space with you. A thing you can do for other people to improve the quality of their worship is improve the audio you are sending. So a headset, again, can help with that as long as you're careful to position the mic so it's not bumping up against your body or picking up a lot of breathing sounds. So a headset, but also an external microphone like the one I'm using right now. Now, this happens to be a podcasting microphone, and I didn't use it for Zoom for a long time, but then just on a lark one time, I set it up for Zoom, And I immediately started getting this feedback from people that they were shocked at how much better my voice sounded all of a sudden. So I was like, well, that seems worth doing.
David, can I jump in?
Yeah, please.
Are you going to talk about the Zoom specific audio settings, or should I do that?
Why don't you do that since you're
Great.
able to actually show it?
Yeah. If you look at the microphone, which for me is floating, so I'm sharing my screen, but there's a little caret next to the microphone. And if you press that, then it should say like select a microphone, select a speaker, test speaker, switch to phone audio. There's this last drop down called audio settings. And on audio settings, I really only use this if someone is having an issue hearing me. And that might have to do with the speakers on their end, but this is one thing that I can control. So under there, it should have a little thing in the left-hand corner that says audio, and you can see what input level under. So there's speaker and microphone. And as I'm talking now, it's showing the amount, like it's green and yellow and red. It's showing how much sound is coming through. So everybody's automatically adjust microphone volume. And you can also suppress background noise in that setting. If you uncheck automatically adjust microphone volume, which I'm going to try for you now, it will allow you to up the input volume, and I should be louder for you now. I can't tell, but you can. So this is helpful. I'm going to go back to automatic. That is helpful if someone's saying, I'm having an issue hearing you. And especially if you're one-on-one or if someone's giving you that feedback, you can adjust that there. If you're having a lot of background noise, these settings are relatively new, but could help. So suppress background noise is under there, auto, low, medium, and high. But Zoom is really trying to help us address the real issues in our lives to make our experience better. I'll turn back to David.
Thanks, Jen. Oh, and the final thing is to consider a second monitor screen. If you have two monitors, you can have one of them showing speaker view and the other one showing gallery view, and that eliminates the need to switch back and forth, which in turn you might find that the switching back and forth from gallery view to speaker view during worship is distracting. And I'm going to ring this little bell, and you're going to hear it like just stop. It's not going to fade out. Okay. And then when I turn on original sound, so this physical space part is a little scary because I'm actually going to show you a picture of my desk. Ah, there it is. So I want to talk about this is what I see when I sit at my desk, and I just want to talk about it a little bit. So, and first of all, I'll say this is not a very worshipful space, but what I do during worship might not be the same things that you do. I do a lot of tech hosting. And so, so I need some of the things at my desk that maybe I wouldn't need if it were just a worship space. And just quickly, I'll tell you about some of the things at my desk. I have a ring light here, which I use to light my own face so that even if I have other lights off in my space, people can see my face. And that's really more for other people than it is for me. It's actually a little bit distracting to have on. I think I mentioned this podcasting mic already, so I won't talk about that again. I have added a second monitor to my setup. And usually I have Zoom on one side and I have, any resources I need on the other. And I have a very, very large desktop clock, which I highly recommend. It's total pain to try to read the clock in the menu bar. I have a wireless keyboard and a wireless trackpad to reduce clutter. And I have a candle, which I often light during worship. And it's sort of one way that I create a separate kind of feeling at my desk. And what you can't see are two speakers, which are behind the screens, but they work pretty well down there. And then under the desk is a subwoofer. And let's see. Jen, why don't you do yours?
That's me. So I wanted to show you a very different setup. And this is not the setup that I use for online events, but it is my space that I worship from. And I intentionally do this differently than the setup that I have now, which also includes a ring light that is shining on my face, a normal chair. I'm in our library. This is my bedroom. I usually have my cup of tea or coffee, which you'll see up there. I have a nice little thing of tissues because it's allergy season. I crocheted this blanket during the pandemic, but I have something cozy to kind of be with me. Sometimes I would crochet while I was on worship. I love this chair and I can sit in it in a bunch of different ways. And then I bought a lap desk. That is key. It sits right on my lap. It's comfortable. My laptop doesn't get hot on my legs. It is amazing. And it's usually where I do sort of other work or reading. Sometimes I take personal Zoom calls there, Zoom therapy. And so I want to create a space and I also have candles in there. That helps me sort of feel different and grounded. I intentionally try not to do work in this chair so that it feels different and less fatiguing for me. That is how I attend Zoom worship. And the importance there, it's early in the morning for me. The sun is shining through these big windows in my bedroom right onto that chair. So I don't have to worry about lighting in the same ways that I do now. But gives me the things that I need to feel less like I'm at work, which is a problem for me. And it's very distracting. And the computer itself is made to be distracting. And it has everything about work. It's like I brought my work bag with me into the meeting for worship. So these are the little things that I do to help it feel really different. You'll notice that David and I have very, very different setups.
And actually, at dinner tonight, I took a poll of my housemates to find out how many people have the same space for like work type meetings and worship, and how many people have different space. So let me just stop sharing for a second and then go into gallery view and raise your hand if you are a person who has the same space for work and worship. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7. And now raise your hand if you have different spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's sort of split down the middle, which was the same at my dinner table. All right.
All right. It is all yours.
Yeah, so these are some more mindfulness questions in the sense of thinking about what you want in your space when you have a chance to prepare it before you need to use it. So the kinds of things you need at arm's reach. We've talked about some of these things already, so this is a little bit more for completeness. We'll talk a little bit about taking notes in a second. I have some great fidget toys. I have some of these really cool rings that I make out of Sculpey, and they're just really wonderful for playing with, and they're fairly quiet. Maybe you are always running out of juice during meeting for worship, and an extra power adapter for your laptop or your computer that you keep in the space where you have worship might be a thing to do. I guess we've talked about this a little bit already. So I want to talk about taking notes. Not so much in meeting for worship, although, in the before time, it was not uncommon to see people with little notebooks that they carry and bring to meeting for worship and jot down a thing or two, or an idea that they have or thought they want to pursue later. In meeting for business and almost any other Quaker setting, I'm always taking notes. And so I personally use a note-taking app. I think the pandemic is a note taker's paradise because we always have our computers with us. So especially if we're the kind of people who like to take notes on the computer, it's so much easier to do while in a Zoom meeting than it is if you're in a committee meeting that you otherwise might not be bringing your laptop to. So whatever works for you. I prefer a note-taking app. And then keeping track of what time it is. I mentioned before that I used the clock in the menu bar for a long time and suffered greatly. And finally, I realized I could just put something on my desktop. Another thing to do is, like, if you have a phone stand at your desk like this, you can just put your phone on it and then leave your phone on the clock. Or you could put a physical clock on your physical desk. Raise your hand if you got one of those. All right, Jen, Susanna, Elaine, very good. Or maybe you want to take the next step. Because what is time anyway? No clock at all is a possibility. It wouldn't work for me, especially if I'm in charge of keeping time, but it might work during meeting for worship. And then thinking a little bit about what other people can see. This is sort of a piece with thinking about what other people are hearing that from the audio you're sending. Earlier in the pandemic, I used this screen a lot. And gradually I started to become, because this is my bedroom. So I gradually became a little bit more comfortable. And I started by putting the screen over here. And then I folded it up a little bit more. And then eventually I just got rid of it entirely. And now my housemates borrow it. But for a while, it was really important to me to kind of keep a more of a boundary between my personal space and the meeting space. Over to you, Jen.
Yeah. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second, and we're just going to talk for a minute about Zoom fatigue. So when David and I talked about this presentation, I had mentioned that I experience Zoom fatigue a lot, and it's part of my barrier to wanting to go to meeting for worship on Sundays. And David was like, I don't really know what you mean by that. And so we thought we might describe what we mean by that. And I've done a lot of sort of thinking about this and research about it. But so I'm going to talk a little bit more higher level here. When we're in a physical space, you take in as a person all of the data of that space. And I'm a person that likes to kind of look at the walls and kind of know where I am. But you have one space to take in all the details of. And you see others in that space, and you can pay attention then to their facial features and, who they are in that space with you. And the brain is meant to take in that information, and we kind of know, and that's normal, and it's a way that we're used to processing. On the computer, when we're on these little Brady Bunch squares, each person has their own background data that is different from the space that you're in. And it's not a thing that you're going to recognize immediately that you're doing this, but your brain is taking in the data from each person's square. So it's not just their face and their features, but it's everything in their space, which is a lot of processing that your brain needs to do to figure out where you are, where they are. It's just a thing we do automatically. But there are also some parts of being with other people that are stripped away when we're in this space. So body language, I don't get to sort of lean into my friend. I don't get to see the way that you're sitting. If I don't get to see you on the screen, I really can't see your face. But even if I'm seeing your face, I'm not getting the full picture of how you're showing up to the space. So I'm doing a little bit more work in my mind of filling in the data that I don't have. As a facilitator of programs, this is a lot of effort, because it is really different than being in one space with new people whom you have to then analyze sort of how are they showing up to the space, what's going on for them, because you're also looking at their camera angle, what they're deciding to show you, all the data in their background, the parts of their body language you can see and what you can't. This is taxing on our minds. And so often at the end of the week, when I've done many meetings and many programs, I start to notice the way that it feels in my body. And I'll back up. There's one other thing I want to talk about, which is the performance aspect of Zoom. Unlike the physical world, we are more attuned to how we're showing up. And for me, it doesn't matter whether I have my self view on or not. I know that I'm being recorded from this particular angle with this camera in this way. And I start to lean my neck a little forward. And I change the way that I hold my body physically. And this is not how I would hold my body if I was standing at the front of the room talking to all of you. I'm hyper aware in a way that we're not normally, of fitting myself in this box and trying to, as a facilitator, project to all of you how I'm, a welcoming presence, or a sort of I'm doing the best with what I have, which is this box and this space and this lighting. And so that makes me feel, and even when I'm on meeting for worship, like there are so many more factors I have to think about, and I'm performing as if I were sort of on a stage, but even like with really bad posture and really bad neck craning. And so I start to notice both my eyes get fatigued in here. And that's from the like squinting and trying to like discern what is going on. And when there's more people, the boxes are smaller. And I'll start to notice it in my neck and in my back. Sometimes I get migraines, and it migrates up to my head from the way that my therapist says I hold my back incorrectly. And all of those things sort of trigger when I turn on the computer. In addition to the way that computers are built is meant to stimulate the mind in similar ways to how like casinos or slot machines do. Lots of colors, lots of data. They're trying to look at me over here, look at me over here. And that's what the computer is meant to do. It's doing its job. But it's really like all of those things on top of each other, those are just true things, are exhausting. And sometimes on Sunday morning, like bringing myself to get on the computer and do that again in the 2 days that I have off is exhausting. So I do similar things to what Kathleen does. I get on my phone. I try not to turn on my camera and hope no one's going to judge me because I'm showing up that way, because this is what we can do. I wear my pajamas. I don't do my hair. I tried hard to kind of stay away. Sometimes I even turn the camera to my spouse, and that makes it easier for me to show up at worship with just my feet in the camera. So that's what I mean by Zoom fatigue. And those are some of the things that I do to get around it. So in our final few minutes, I'm going to share the screen again. So David and I also talked about some further discernment, seasoning, or experimenting questions that we're holding. So things we couldn't really get to here, but things that we think warrant further conversation. So things we're thinking about: what new practices can help us create avenues for more people to engage, or more varieties of engagement? And some things we mean by this are like being able to toggle your camera on and off without judgment. Being able to set the space so that is okay. What do people need right now in order for this Zoom meeting to work for them is going to be another way of asking. As facilitators, we set up spaces not only or like people with care of meeting for other people, we set up the rules of engagement for the space in ways that can welcome different kinds of engagement with the Zoom platform itself. What changes do we make to our introductions to set that space for welcoming and engagement? And how do we create more space for people to have a less fatigued experience? Are some of the questions that we're holding. And this is going to require experimentation, changing the rules, articulating different boundaries like I do at the beginning of this program. We say, you're welcome to do these things. Here's how we're going to do it in this space. And the reason we do that is to try to make it clear how people might want to show up to this space. So in the last few minutes that we have about another minute, what are some of the questions that you're holding and that we can sort of add to our list of other questions you want to consider in community?